Hello and welcome. Today we're going to break down a really important compliance topic for any nonprofit that fundraises, the charitable solicitation registration requirements specifically for the state of Kentucky. Let's get right into it.
This explainer is part of our multi-state fundraising compliance series, where we try to make these complex rules a lot more practical. And it's all brought to you by the specialists at Ironwood Registrations.
So for most people running a nonprofit, the first big compliance hurdle you think about is getting that tax-exempt status from the IRS, right? It's a huge deal and it's absolutely essential.
But here's the thing you absolutely have to remember, that federal status is just one piece of the compliance puzzle. Getting it doesn't mean you're done. Actually, when it comes to state-level fundraising, your journey is really just getting started. And here's why. Most states, and Kentucky is definitely one of them, have their own totally separate set of rules for regulating charitable fundraising. So if you're asking people for donations, the state government wants to know about it, and your federal approval just isn't enough. So in this explainer, we're going to walk through the 5 key things you really need to know to stay compliant in Kentucky. We'll cover the basic rules, how to actually register, who might be exempt from all this, what you need to do to renew each year, and finally, how to manage this for the long haul.
Okay, let's start with the fundamentals, Kentucky's specific rules on fundraising. Like a lot of states, they have a system set up to make sure there's transparency for donors.
The agency in charge of all this is the Office of the Attorney General, and specifically, it's their Consumer Protection Division. They're the ones who keep the records and make sure everyone is following the rules. And that brings us to the biggest question for any nonprofit leader. Who exactly has to register? Does this actually apply to your organization?
Well, the answer is pretty broad. Basically, any nonprofit that asks for donations from people in Kentucky has to register. It doesn't matter if your organization is based in Kentucky or if you're out of state. And yep, this covers all the modern ways of fundraising. We're talking direct mail, email blasts, social media campaigns, and even just having a Donate Now button on your website that people in Kentucky can use.
All right, so now that we know who needs to register, let's get into the practical side of it. How do you actually file that initial paperwork? This is where Kentucky is a little different from other states. For most organizations, there isn't some special state-specific form you have to fill out. Instead, you just register by mailing a copy of your most recent IRS Form 990 and your IRS determination letter directly to the Attorney General's office. Pretty straightforward. But what if you're a brand new nonprofit and you haven't even filed a Form 990 yet? Well, in that case, Kentucky lets you use what's called the Unified Registration Statement, or URS, as an alternative to get that first registration filed. So, what's this going to cost you? Here's some really good news. The state filing fee for charitable registration in Kentucky is $0. That's right, it costs absolutely nothing to file, which is great because that removes a pretty common barrier for a lot of organizations. Of course, like with most roles, not every single organization is required to register. So let's talk about the next critical piece, understanding the key exemptions. Kentucky law does exempt certain types of organizations. This usually includes religious organizations, some educational institutions, membership groups that are only asking for money from their own members, and school groups like PTAs. If you fit perfectly into one of these buckets, you might not have to file at all. Now listen up, because this is a really crucial point. Unlike a lot of other states, Kentucky does not have an exemption for small charities based on how much money they raise. It doesn't matter if you raise $10 or $10 million from Kentucky residents, the registration rule is the same. This is a common trap that a lot of smaller nonprofits fall into. So registration isn't just a one-and-done thing. To stay in good standing, you have to renew every year. Let's take a look at how that works. The whole renewal process is tied to your organization's fiscal year. Your filing, which again is just a copy of your Form 990, is technically due 4.5 months after your fiscal year ends. But, and this is great, Kentucky provides an automatic 6-month extension. This gives you a final deadline of 10.5 months after your year end to get that paperwork in.
Okay, for our last section, let's zoom out a bit. How do you build this into your nonprofit's regular operations to make sure you stay compliant year after year?
Long-term success here really comes down to monitoring. You need a system to track all your fundraising activities, keep a close eye on those deadlines, make sure your financial reporting is accurate, and every so often, just double-check if your exemption status has changed. And of course, always remember, Kentucky is just one state. At the end of the day, Kentucky's registration requirements are really all about promoting transparency and accountability in the nonprofit world. When you comply, you're showing everyone that you're committed to ethical fundraising, and that helps build public trust.
So this all leaves us with one final, pretty important question. Handling compliance in one state is one thing, but as your organization grows, are you really prepared for the complexities of multi-state fundraising?
If managing these registrations in Kentucky or maybe all across the country starts to feel a little overwhelming, Ironwood Registration specializes in helping nonprofits stay compliant. That way, you can focus on what really matters, your mission. You can learn more at ironwoodregistrations.com.